The grand chandelier shimmered like a frozen cascade of light, scattering golden reflections across the polished marble floor. Soft classical music floated through the air, blending with the hum of elite conversations and the clinking of crystal glasses. Waiters moved with perfect precision, guests dressed in luxury laughed effortlessly, and everything about the evening spoke of power, wealth, and perfection. At the center of it all stood Armin Halim. Dressed in a tailored black suit, his expression remained calm, almost distant, as if none of this truly belonged to him. People approached him with admiration, some with hidden intentions, others with forced smiles, but he responded the same way to all, a polite nod, a brief word, and then silence. Years of success had built a wall around him, one that no one seemed able to cross. He had everything a man could desire: wealth, influence, respect. Yet, strangely, nothing ever touched him anymore. Not joy. Not excitement. Not even nostalgia. His gaze drifted lazily across the room, uninterested, until something unusual caught the edge of his attention. A small movement. A quiet presence that didn't belong to the glittering world around him. A maid. She moved carefully between the guests, her head slightly lowered, trying not to draw attention to herself. Her uniform was simple, almost invisible among the sea of luxury. No one noticed her. No one cared to. Armin would have looked away like everyone else. But then the light shifted. A single beam from the chandelier fell across her hand as she lifted a tray, and something glinted. A ring. Simple. Silver. Worn with time. But unmistakable. Armin's breath caught. For a moment, the noise of the room faded, as if the world had been pulled underwater. His eyes locked onto that small, fragile object, and suddenly, the present began to blur. A strange, unfamiliar feeling stirred inside his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Not power. Not control. But recognition. His fingers tightened slightly at his side, his heartbeat no longer steady. That ring, it wasn't just any ring. It carried a memory buried so deep he had convinced himself it was gone forever. Cold nights. Empty stomachs. A broken fence. And a small hand holding his. No, he whispered under his breath, almost inaudible. Across the room, the maid shifted again, unaware of the storm she had awakened. But Armin couldn't move. For the first time in years, the billionaire stood frozen. Before he realized it, his feet had already started moving. The crowd parted naturally for him, as it always did, but tonight he didn't notice the respect, the whispers, or the curious glances trailing behind him. His entire world had narrowed down to one thing, the faint glimmer of that ring. The maid turned slightly as he approached, startled by his sudden presence. Her hands tightened around the tray she was holding, and she instinctively lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry, sir, did I do something wrong?" she asked softly, her voice careful, almost practiced in apology. He didn't answer her question. Instead, his eyes dropped straight to her hand. Up close, the ring looked even more familiar, its edges worn, its shine faded, but its shape, its tiny engraved line along the side, exactly the same. "Where did you get that ring?" he asked. His voice was low, controlled, but there was something beneath it. Something fragile. She hesitated, confused by the intensity in his gaze. Slowly, she shifted the tray to one hand, instinctively pulling the other slightly back. "It's mine," she replied after a moment. "I've had it for as long as I can remember." His jaw tightened. "As long as you can remember," he repeated, as if testing the truth of her words. She nodded, still unsure why this mattered. For a second, he said nothing. The silence between them stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Around them, the party continued as if nothing had changed, but for him, everything had already begun to collapse. Fragments of the past forced their way into his mind. A cold night under a leaking roof. The smell of damp wood. Hunger twisting in his stomach. And beside him, a girl. Small. Thin. But smiling. She had taken off a ring from her tiny finger and pressed it into his hand. "Don't lose it," she had said. "So you don't forget me." His breath grew uneven. "You used to sit near the broken fence," he said suddenly, his voice quieter now, almost unsteady. "At the orphanage. You said you liked that place because you could see the stars through the gap." The maid's eyes flickered. She slowly looked up at him, really looked at him this time. Not as a wealthy man. Not as someone powerful. But as someone familiar. She started, then stopped. He took a small step closer, his composure slipping with every second. You weren't afraid of the dark, he continued. Even when the others cried, you stayed there. Her grip on the tray loosened slightly. And you used to say, he swallowed, his voice almost breaking now, that one day, things would change. A long silence followed. Then, barely above a whisper, she spoke. And you said, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name, when you become rich, you'll come back for me. Time seemed to stop. The distance between past and present vanished in an instant. And in that crowded, glittering hall, two forgotten children finally found each other again. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The noise of the party returned slowly, like a distant echo, but it no longer belonged to them. They stood in a fragile silence, as if one wrong word could shatter everything that had just resurfaced. Armin searched her face, trying to find the little girl he once knew in the woman standing before him. The same eyes, but heavier now. Tired in a way childhood never should be. I looked for you, he said at last, his voice no longer steady. After I left, after everything changed, I came back. You were gone. Her lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I waited, she replied quietly. For a while. Something in his chest tightened painfully. I thought you forgot, she added, her gaze dropping for a moment. Or maybe, you found a better life and didn't need to remember the old one. I never forgot, he said quickly, almost desperately. Not you. Not that place. Not what I promised. The word promised lingered between them. She let out a soft breath, as if that word carried more weight than he understood. Life didn't give me the luxury to hold on to promises, she said gently. When you're trying to survive, you don't wait for someone to come back. You learn to keep moving. Each word landed quietly, but deeply. Armin shook his head, as if refusing to accept it. I would have come sooner if I knew where you were. I built everything, thinking one day I'd find you again. She looked at him then, really looked, at the expensive suit, the confident posture, the life that seemed so far from the broken boy she once knew. And you did, she said softly. You became everything you said you would. There was no admiration in her tone. Just truth. But somehow, that made it heavier. He stepped closer, as if trying to bridge not just the distance between them, but the years that had changed them both. I meant what I said back then, he murmured. Every word of it. Her fingers instinctively touched the ring, as if grounding herself. I'll marry you, he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. They hung in the air, raw, sudden, almost out of place in the present. Her expression didn't change the way he expected. No surprise. No joy. Just a quiet stillness. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then, very slowly, she looked down at the ring on her finger, and then back at him. Something unspoken passed through her eyes, something deeper than rejection, more complicated than acceptance. And in that silence, Armin realized something for the first time. He had kept the promise alive all these years. But he had never asked what it had cost her to do the same. The air between them grew heavier, as if the world itself was waiting for her answer. She looked at him for a long moment, really looked this time. Not at the billionaire everyone admired, but at the men standing behind that image. Searching, uncertain, almost vulnerable. Then, gently, she set the tray aside on a nearby table. Her hand moved again, instinctively brushing against the ring, as though it carried the weight of everything she couldn't say out loud. You shouldn't say things like that so easily, she spoke at last, her voice calm but firm. His brows tightened. It's not easy, he replied. I've carried this for years. She shook her head slightly. No, she said softly. You carried a memory. A moment. A promise made by a boy who didn't know what life would become. Her words didn't rise, but they struck deeper than anything loud ever could. I am that boy, he insisted, a hint of desperation slipping through. I just grew into something more. She met his gaze without hesitation. That's the problem, she said. Silence fell again. You became more, she continued quietly, and somewhere along the way, you left that boy behind. He stared at her, the meaning sinking in slowly, painfully. I did everything to survive, she went on. So did you. But we didn't become the same people in the end. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. Because a part of him knew, she wasn't wrong. You're standing here offering me a promise, she said, her voice softening now, but not breaking. But it doesn't feel like the one you made back then. His chest tightened. Why? Because back then, she said, taking a small step closer, you had nothing to give, except your heart. Her eyes held his, unwavering. And now, she added, glancing briefly at the world around them, the glitter, the wealth, the distance, you have everything, except that same simplicity. The truth of it settled between them like a quiet storm. I didn't forget you, he said, his voice lower now, almost fragile. Not for a single day. I know, she replied gently. That answer surprised him. Then why, he began, but his words faded. She reached out slowly, and for a second, it felt like she might take his hand. But instead, she stopped midway, and let her fingers fall back to her side. I'm not rejecting you, she said softly. I'm reminding you. Of what? He asked, barely above a whisper. Her gaze softened, but her words remained steady. Of who you were when you made that promise. He felt something inside him crack, not loudly, not suddenly, but deeply. You promised to marry me, she said, her voice almost a whisper now, not because you were rich, not because you could. She paused, letting the silence carry the weight of her truth. But because you were kind, and you believed love was enough. His eyes lowered, unable to hold hers anymore. And somewhere along the way, she finished quietly, you stopped being that person. The music continued. The laughter echoed. The world around them stayed the same. But for Armin, everything had already changed. The headlines spread faster than anyone could understand. Armin Halim, the man who built an empire from nothing, had stepped down overnight. No scandal. No explanation. Just a quiet resignation that left the business world in shock. His companies were handed over, his shares divided, his name slowly fading from the circles that once revolved around him. People called it madness. Some said he had lost everything. But for the first time in years, he felt like he had finally stopped losing himself. The days that followed were nothing like the life he had known. No polished floors. No tailored suits. No one waiting to impress him or ask for his approval. Just simple mornings, quiet work, and a kind of silence that didn't feel empty anymore. In a small cafe tucked away from the noise of the city, he wiped down wooden tables, served tea with his own hands, and greeted strangers with a warmth he had long forgotten he possessed. The work was ordinary. Repetitive. Real. And strangely, it made him feel alive. At night, when the cafe closed and the lights dimmed, he would sometimes pause, his hand resting against the counter, lost in thought. Not about the empire he left behind, but about a boy sitting by a broken fence, believing that kindness was the only wealth that mattered. He wasn't trying to find her. Not anymore. Because now, he understood. It was never about finding her. It was about finding himself. Months passed. Seasons shifted quietly, unnoticed by the world that had already moved on without him. Then one evening, as the sky turned a soft shade of gold and the cafe hummed with a gentle calm, the small bell above the door rang. A simple sound. But something about it made him look up. And there she was. Standing at the entrance, just as she had that night, quiet, composed, yet carrying the same unspoken strength in her eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. No shock. No rush. Just a quiet understanding. He set the cloth down slowly, his hands no longer trembling like before. This time, there was no desperation in his eyes, only peace. You found your way back, she said softly, stepping inside. He shook his head slightly, a faint smile touching his lips. Not to you, he replied gently. To who I was. Her gaze lingered on him, searching, measuring, not his clothes, not his place, but his presence. And this time, she saw it. The boy. Not in his appearance, but in the way he stood, the way he looked at her, not with possession, not with urgency, but with quiet sincerity. She walked closer, each step unhurried, as if closing a distance that had never really been about space. From her pocket, she took out the ring. The same worn silver ring that had carried their past through years of silence. She placed it on the table between them. "I didn't refuse you," she said, her voice soft, but certain. "I was waiting." He looked at the ring, then at her. "Waiting for what?" he asked quietly. "For you to come back," she replied. Not as a billionaire, but as the boy who meant every word he said. His eyes filled, but this time, he didn't look away. Because there was nothing left to hide behind. No status. No distance. No fear. Just truth. He didn't reach for the ring immediately. Instead, he reached for her hand. Gently. Carefully. As if he understood now that some things weren't meant to be taken, but earned. She didn't pull away. And in that small, quiet cafe, far from wealth, far from power, something real finally found its place again. No grand promises were spoken this time. Because they both knew. The boy who once made the promise had finally returned. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere.